I had always been a skeptic when it came to anything paranormal. Ghost stories, haunted houses, and eerie tales were all just fun fiction to me. I never imagined that I'd find myself living one. But sometimes, the things we don't believe in have a way of making themselves known, especially when you least expect it. It all started when I took a babysitting job in an old, sprawling Victorian house on the edge of town. Mrs. Witman, the mother, was an elegant woman in her mid-30s, with an air of sophistication and a warm smile that made her instantly likable. She needed someone to watch over her two children, Emily and Jack, for the evening while she attended a charity event. The pay was good, and the kids seemed sweet, so I gladly accepted. The house was enormous, with high ceilings, intricate woodwork, and an aura of faded grandeur. It felt like stepping back in time. Mrs. Witman showed me around, giving me a quick tour of the rooms I might need to access: the kitchen, the kids' bedrooms, the playroom, and the living room, where I'd be spending most of my time. Emily and Jack should be in bed by 8, she said as we stood in the kitchen. They're usually good sleepers, but if they wake up, just read them a story. There's a book on the nightstand in Emily's room. I nodded, assuring her I could handle everything. As she left, I watched her drive away, her car disappearing into the fog that had started to roll in. Alone now, I turned back to the house, a slight chill running down my spine as I closed the door behind me. The evening started uneventfully. Emily, a sweet little girl with curly blonde hair, and Jack, her mischievous younger brother, were a joy to be around. We played board games in the living room, and after some coaxing, they both headed upstairs to bed. I tucked them in, read a short story to Emily as she drifted off, and then quietly closed their doors. Back downstairs, I settled into the couch with a book I had brought along, letting the silence of the house envelop me. The only sounds were the occasional creaks and groans of the old house settling, a perfectly normal occurrence, I told myself. An hour passed, and the house grew colder. I pulled a blanket over myself, trying to focus on my book, but something kept nagging at me. It was as if the air had changed, thickened with an oppressive presence that made it hard to breathe. I chalked it up to my imagination, but then I heard it, a faint sound, almost like a whisper, coming from upstairs. I froze, listening intently. The whispering grew louder, more distinct, though I couldn't make out the words. My heart started to race as I realized it was coming from Emily's room. I put the book down and reluctantly stood up, every instinct telling me to ignore it, to leave the house right then and there. But I couldn't just leave the kids. I had to check on them. As I climbed the stairs, the whispering became clearer, almost as if someone was standing just behind the door, speaking in a low, hurried tone. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob, pushing the door open ever so slightly. Emily was sound asleep, her small chest rising and falling peacefully. But the whispering continued, louder now, coming from the direction of the closet. My breath caught in my throat as I noticed the closet door was slightly ajar. The darkness beyond it seemed to pulse, as if something was hiding just out of sight. "Emily?" I whispered, my voice shaky. She didn't stir. I took a step closer to the closet, the whispering now so clear that it sent chills racing down my spine. I could almost make out the words, but they were in a language I didn't understand. My hand reached for the closet door, but before I could touch it, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang. I jumped back, nearly screaming as Emily suddenly sat up in bed, her eyes wide open, staring straight ahead. "Emily?" I repeated, my voice trembling. She turned her head slowly to look at me, but her eyes, they weren't right. They were blank, empty, like she was staring through me rather than at me. She began to speak, but the voice that came out wasn't hers. It was low, guttural, and filled with malice. "Get out," she said, the words drawn out, distorted. "You don't belong here." I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest, unable to comprehend what was happening. Emily suddenly slumped back onto her pillow, her eyes closing as if nothing had happened. The room was silent again, but the air was thick with a sense of dread that hung over me like a dark cloud. I fled the room, practically running down the stairs. My first thought was to call Mrs. Witman, but my phone had no signal. Panic started to set in as the lights in the house flickered, casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to dance along the walls. I heard a noise behind me, a soft giggle, unmistakably Jack's. I turned slowly, the blood draining from my face as I saw him standing at the bottom of the stairs, his small figure illuminated by the faint glow of the hallway light. "Jack," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why aren't you in bed?" He didn't answer, just stood there with an unsettling smile on his face, his eyes dark and hollow. My stomach churned as he tilted his head to the side, his smile widening into something almost unnatural. "Do you want to play with us?" he asked, his voice echoing strangely in the empty hallway. Who's us?" I stammered, dread creeping into my voice. Jack giggled again, but this time it was echoed by another voice, a low, raspy whisper that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "They want to play with you too," he said, his voice laced with an ominous glee. I took a step back, but as I did, the shadows on the walls started to move, converging toward me. They twisted and writhed, forming grotesque shapes that seemed to reach out with long, clawed hands. The air grew colder, the temperature dropping so rapidly that I could see my breath fogging in front of me. "Jack," I pleaded, trying to snap him out of whatever trance he was in. "This isn't funny. Please, just go back to bed." But he didn't move. Instead, the shadows crept closer, their forms becoming more defined, figures with hollow eyes and gaping mouths, their whispers growing louder, filling my head with a cacophony of voices that made me want to scream. In a blind panic, I bolted for the front door, but no matter how hard I pulled, it wouldn't budge. It was as if the house itself was keeping me trapped. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, their tone now mocking and malevolent. The lights flickered again, plunging the house into darkness. I fumbled in my pocket for my phone, desperately trying to turn on the flashlight, but the screen remained black. A sense of hopelessness washed over me as I realized I was truly alone, trapped in a house that was alive with something dark and ancient. Suddenly, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around, expecting to see Jack or one of the shadows, but there was nothing. Just the empty hallway stretching out in front of me. But the hand remained, its grip tightening, squeezing the breath out of me. "Leave, now," the voice hissed in my ear, sending a jolt of terror through me. I broke free, stumbling backward, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I didn't need to be told twice. I raced back up the stairs, not caring where I was going as long as it was away from whatever was down there. The house seemed to shift around me, the hallways twisting and turning in ways they hadn't before. Doors appeared where there had been none, and familiar rooms vanished, replaced by dark, endless corridors. Finally, I found myself at the end of a hallway, facing a door that I hadn't seen before. It was old, the wood cracked and weathered, with strange symbols carved into it. I hesitated, but the whispers behind me were growing louder, more frenzied. I had no choice. I pushed the door open, stepping into a small, dimly lit room. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and in the center of the room was an old rocking chair, slowly moving back and forth on its own. The shadows in the room seemed to gather around it, drawn to it like moths to a flame. And then I saw her. A figure, barely visible in the darkness, sitting in the chair. Her hair was long and matted, obscuring her face, but I could feel her eyes on me, boring into my soul. She raised a hand, pointing at me with a skeletal finger. "You shouldn't have come here," she whispered, her voice a low, mournful wail that echoed through the room. "Now you can never leave." I backed away, but the door slammed shut behind me, trapping me inside. The shadows closed in, the figure in the chair rising slowly, her movements jerky and unnatural. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The last thing I saw before the darkness swallowed me was her face, twisted, pale, and filled with a rage so intense that it felt like it would consume me whole. And then, everything went black. I don't know how long I was out. When I finally came to, I was lying on the cold, hard floor of that dreadful room. The first thing I noticed was the oppressive silence. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. My body ached, and my head was pounding, but the worst part was the sense of overwhelming dread that hung in the air like a thick fog. I tried to stand, but my legs felt weak, like they couldn't support my weight. I had to use the wall for support as I pulled myself up. The room was darker now, the shadows deeper, and the figure that had been in the rocking chair was gone. The chair itself was still rocking gently, as if she had just gotten up. The symbols carved into the door caught my eye again. I hadn't noticed it before, but they seemed to pulse with a faint, eerie glow now, as if they were alive. I didn't understand their meaning, but I knew they weren't anything good. The room felt like it was closing in on me, suffocating me with its darkness and malevolence. I had to get out of there. Somehow, I found the strength to move, and I stumbled toward the door, desperate to escape this nightmare. But as I reached for the handle, the door didn't budge. Panic surged through me. I was trapped again. "No," I whispered to myself, trying to keep the fear from overwhelming me. "No, this isn't real. It can't be real." But it was. I could feel it in my bones, in the way the air itself seemed to hum with a sinister energy. I turned around, scanning the room for another way out, and that's when I saw it, a mirror, tall and ornate, standing in the far corner, partially obscured by the shadows. I hadn't noticed it before, but now it seemed to be the only thing in the room that wasn't drenched in darkness. I approached it cautiously, every step filled with dread. The mirror was old, the glass cloudy and cracked in places, but there was something about it that drew me in. My reflection was dim, barely visible in the murky surface, but as I got closer, I realized there was something else reflected in it, something standing behind me. I spun around, but the room was empty. My heart raced as I turned back to the mirror, and there it was again, another figure, just behind my own reflection. This one wasn't like the woman in the chair. It was tall, its form shrouded in darkness, with eyes that glowed a sickly yellow. They locked onto mine, and I felt a cold wave of terror wash over me. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it raised one long, clawed hand and pointed at the door behind me. I glanced back at the door, the one that had refused to open, and when I looked back at the mirror, the figure was closer, its eyes burning into me. I didn't know what it wanted, but I knew I had to get out. I turned and grabbed the door handle, yanking it with all my strength. This time, it gave way, swinging open with a creak that echoed through the empty halls. I didn't hesitate. I ran, not caring where I was going, just wanting to get as far away from that room as possible. The house had changed. The hallways were longer, twisting and turning in ways that defied logic. Doors appeared and disappeared at random, and the walls seemed to shift as I ran past them, as if the house itself was trying to trap me. I could hear footsteps behind me, heavy and slow, keeping pace no matter how fast I ran. "Get out," a voice whispered, echoing through the halls. "Get out before it's too late." I turned a corner, nearly slipping on the polished wood floor, and came face to face with a dead end. The hallway ended in a solid wall, with no doors, no windows, no escape. The footsteps were getting closer, the sound reverberating through the air. I pressed myself against the wall, my heart pounding in my chest as the shadows closed in. "Please," I begged, though I didn't know who I was pleading with. "Please, let me go." And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I heard a sound, a faint, distant ringing, like a bell. It grew louder, clearer, cutting through the oppressive darkness. The shadows seemed to recoil at the sound, pulling back as if in fear. I turned my head, and there, at the end of the hall, was another door, one that hadn't been there before. The bell continued to ring, a steady, rhythmic chime that grew louder with each passing second. I pushed off from the wall, feeling an inexplicable pull toward the door. The footsteps behind me faded, replaced by the sound of the bell, its chime now almost deafening. I reached the door, my hand trembling as I grasped the handle. The door swung open easily, revealing a staircase leading down into darkness. The bell was louder now, its sound reverberating through the walls, guiding me forward. I didn't want to go down those stairs, but something compelled me to keep moving, to follow the sound. The stairs creaked under my weight as I descended, the darkness thickening with each step. The air grew colder, and I could feel the presence of something watching me, something that lurked just out of sight. The bell continued to ring, though now it sounded more like a heartbeat, steady and relentless. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a small, dimly lit room. In the center was an old, iron bell, swinging back and forth on its own, though there was no visible mechanism to move it. The sound was almost hypnotic, drawing me closer until I was standing right in front of it. And that's when I saw them, figures, barely visible in the shadows that clung to the edges of the room. There were dozens of them, their forms shifting and writhing as they watched me with glowing eyes. They were the souls of those who had been trapped here before, I realized with a cold, sinking dread. The bell was their prison, their curse, and now it was mine too. "No," I whispered, backing away. "I won't be like you. I won't stay here." But the figures didn't move, didn't speak. They just watched as the bell continued to ring, louder and louder until it drowned out every thought, every fear. I covered my ears, trying to block out the sound, but it was useless. The bell was inside my head, inside my very soul, pulling me down into the darkness with it. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the bell stopped. The silence that followed was so profound that it was almost deafening. The figures in the shadows began to fade, their forms dissipating into the darkness, until I was alone. The bell was still there, but now it was silent, motionless. I could feel a change in the air, a shift in the atmosphere. The darkness was still there, but it was no longer oppressive. I could breathe again, think again. I didn't know what had happened, but I knew I had to leave, to get out of this house before something else tried to trap me. I turned and ran back up the stairs, my legs weak but determined. The house seemed different now, the hallways shorter, the doors no longer shifting. It was as if the house had given up, had let go of whatever hold it had on me. I reached the front door and threw it open, the cool night air hitting me like a wave of relief. I stumbled out onto the porch, gasping for breath, the fear still clinging to me like a second skin. I didn't stop running until I was down the driveway, away from the house and its horrors. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just kept running, the sound of the bell still echoing in my mind, a reminder of what I had escaped. But I knew, deep down, that I would never truly be free of it. The house had left its mark on me, a scar that would never fully heal. When I finally reached home, I collapsed onto the couch, my body shaking with exhaustion and fear. I wanted to cry, to scream, to do something to release the terror that had gripped me, but all I could do was sit there, staring into the darkness of my living room. The phone rang, startling me out of my stupor. I reached for it with trembling hands, my heart racing as I saw Mrs. Witman's name on the screen. "Hello?" I answered, my voice weak and shaky. "Are you okay?" Her voice was calm, almost soothing. "I've been trying to reach you all night. The house, it can be a bit strange sometimes." "A bit strange?" I nearly choked on the words. What the hell is wrong with that place? There was a pause on the other end of the line, and when she spoke again, her voice was different, colder. "You saw them, didn't you? The others. What are you talking about?" I demanded, my fear quickly turning to anger. "The house, it has a way of keeping those who see too much," she said, her tone cryptic. "But you're out now. Consider yourself lucky." "Lucky? That place is a nightmare." Mrs. Witman sighed. "You should get some rest. Forget about what happened. It's better that way." The line went dead, and I was left staring at the phone in disbelief. Forget? How could I possibly forget what had happened? But as I sat there, the exhaustion finally overtaking me, I realized that maybe she was right. Maybe forgetting was the only way to move on, to live without the constant fear that something was lurking just out of sight. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those glowing eyes, those shifting shadows, and heard the sound of that bell, still ringing in the depths of my mind. But as the sun began to rise, bathing the room in a soft, golden light, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The horrors of the night before seemed distant, like a bad dream that was slowly fading from memory. Maybe forgetting was possible after all. I got up, walked to the window, and looked out at the morning sky. The world outside was calm, peaceful, as if nothing had happened. But deep down, I knew the truth. The house was still out there, waiting, watching, its darkness ready to consume anyone who ventured too close. And I knew that no matter how hard I tried, I would never truly escape it. The memory of that night would haunt me forever, a reminder that some things are better left unseen, unknown, forgotten. But for now, I was out. I was safe. And that had to be enough. For now.